Chapter 4. The Meaning of Life. This chapter begins with a Michelangelo painting, The Creation of Adam, from the Sistine Chapel. As Jeremy writes in paragraph 280, in interpretations of the painting, God is said to be in the process of creating Adam, yet it can also be construed as God and man reaching out to each other. The caption reads, Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam from the Sistine Chapel, circa 1508-12. Michelangelo's masterpiece also came to symbolize our hope of reconciliation with God, which has now occurred. Chapter 4.1. Summary. While the conventional view in science is that there is no direction or purpose or meaning to existence, and that change is random, there is, in fact, a very obvious theme, direction, purpose and meaning to existence, which is the ordering or integration or complexification of matter into ever larger and more stable wholes. Indeed, the answer to the great question of what is the meaning of life is that it is to live in accordance with this integrative, order of matter developing, cooperation and selfless behaviour dependent theme or meaning of existence. However, until we could explain our seemingly imperfect human condition, explain why humans appear to have been living in defiance of integrative meaning, namely in a divisive, competitive and selfish way, such a truth could not be faced. But, as seen in the previous chapter, since we can now at last explain the good reason why we humans have been divisively rather than integratively behaved, we can finally admit the truth of integrative meaning and acknowledge that there is a direction or purpose to existence. And furthermore, since our concept of God is actually the personification of the unbearably condemning truth of integrative meaning, through admitting this truth, humans can also demystify God and, by so doing, change from being a God-fearing species to a God-confronting one. Yes, the instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition makes sense of and reconciles all the unresolved manifestations of the polarities of the human situation. Good versus evil, idealism or God versus humans' non-ideal existence, religion versus science, holism versus mechanism, altruism versus egotism, communism versus capitalism, conscience versus conscious, and so on, thus ameliorating or healing and finally ending the psychologically upset, divisive way we have been living. Chapter 4.2. The obvious truth of the development of order of matter on Earth. In starting this fully accountable, true explanation of the meaning of life, we need to take a look at our surroundings. As you do, you'll note that the most obvious characteristic of our world is that it's full of things, variously enduring arrangements of matter, like plants, animals, clouds and rocks. And not only that, it is apparent that these arrangements of matter consist of a hierarchy of ordered parts. A tree, for instance, is a hierarchy of ordered matter. It has a trunk, limbs, roots, leaves and wood cells. Our bodies are also a collection of parts, as are clouds and rocks, which are built from different elements and compounds. Furthermore, what we have seen happen over time to these arrangements of matter is that there's been a progression from simple to more complex arrangements. From the fundamental ingredients of our world of matter, space and time, matter has become ordered into ever larger, in space, and more stable or durable in time arrangements. To elaborate, our world is constructed from some 94 naturally occurring elements that have come together to form stable arrangements. For example, two hydrogen atoms with their single positive charges came together with one oxygen atom with its double negative charge to form the stable relationship known as water. Over time, larger molecules and compounds developed. Eventually, macro compounds formed. These then integrated to form virus-like organisms, which in turn came together or integrated to form single-celled organisms that then integrated to form multicellular organisms, which in turn integrated to form societies of single species that continue to integrate to form stable, ordered arrangements of different species. Clearly, what is happening on Earth is that matter is integrating into larger and more stable wholes. And this development of order is not only occurring here, it is also happening out in the universe, where, over the eons, a chaotic cosmos continues to organise itself into stars, planets and galaxies. As two of the world's greatest physicists, Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein, have said, respectively, the overwhelming impression is of order in the universe, and behind everything is an order. Here in the book below paragraph 315 is a very important diagram that looks like a branching tree upside down, with the smallest branches at the bottom representing the building block fundamental particles of matter, which then link up or integrate to form thicker branches representing molecules, which in turn link up to form the even thicker branches of compounds, then virus-like organisms, then single-cell organisms, then multicellular organisms, and onwards to the integration of all matter as the trunk at the top. An arrow on the side of the chart indicates the upward development of order or integration of matter on Earth. The caption reads, "Development of order or integration of matter on Earth." A similar chart appears in Arthur Koestler's 1978 book, Janus, A Summing Up. The law of physics that accounts for this integration of matter is known as the second path of the second law of thermodynamics, or negative entropy, which states that in an open system, where energy can come into the system from outside it, in Earth's case from the Sun, and in the case of the universe from the original Big Bang explosion that created it, matter integrates. It develops order. Thus, subject to the influence of negative entropy, the 94 elements from which our world is built develop ever larger and more stable wholes. In his 1978 book, Janus, A Summing Up, the scientist-philosopher Arthur Koestler gave this excellent summary of the history of the concept of negative entropy. One of the basic doctrines of the 19th century mechanistic worldview was Clausius's famous second law of thermodynamics. It asserted that the universe was running down towards its final dissolution because its energy is being steadily, inexorably dissipated. Cosmos dissolving into chaos. Only fairly recently did science begin to recover from the hypnotic effect of this gloomy vision by realizing that the second law applies only in the special case of so-called closed systems, whereas all living organisms are open systems which maintain their complex structure and function by continuously drawing materials and energy from their environment. It was in fact a physicist, not a biologist, the Nobel laureate Erwin Schrödinger, who put an end to the tyranny of the second law with his celebrated dictum, "What an organism feeds on is negative entropy." Schrödinger's revolutionary concept of neg-entropy, published in 1944, is a somewhat perverse way of referring to the power of living organisms to build up instead of running down, to create complex structures out of simpler elements, integrated patterns out of shapelessness, order out of disorder. The same irrepressible building up tendency is manifest in the progress of evolution, the emergence of new levels of complexity in the organismic hierarchy and new methods of functional coordination. Significantly, Koestler wrote of the active striving of living matter towards order, of a drive towards synthesis, towards growth, towards wholeness, and that this innate drive derives from the integrative tendency. So the theme of existence, the overall direction or destiny of change, or, from a conscious observer's point of view, the overall purpose or meaning of existence, is the ordering or integration or complexification of matter. Teleology, as defined by the Macquarie Dictionary, is the belief that purpose and design are a part of nature. And holism, which the concise Oxford Dictionary defines as the tendency in nature to form wholes, are terms that recognise this integrative tendency. The concept holism was first introduced by the South African denial-free thinker or prophet, the statesman, philosopher and scientist Jan Smuts, in his 1926 book Holism and Evolution. Smuts conceived holism as the ultimate organising regulative activity in the universe that accounts for all the structural groupings and syntheses in it, from the atom and the physico-chemical structures, through the cell and organisms, through mind in animals, to personality in man. But while the integrative meaning of existence is the most obvious of all truths, it has also been the most difficult of all truths for humans to acknowledge, for an extremely good reason. The difficulty arises from the fact that for a collection of parts to form and hold together, for matter to integrate, the parts of the developing whole must cooperate, behave selflessly, place the maintenance of the whole above the maintenance of themselves. Because if they don't cooperate, if they compete, behave selfishly or inconsiderately, then the whole disintegrates. The parts break down into the more elementary building blocks of matter from which they were assembled. As Koestler stated, to create order out of disorder requires functional coordination. A leaf falling from a tree in autumn does so to ensure that the tree survives through winter and carries on. It puts the maintenance of the whole, namely the tree, above the maintenance of itself. The effective functioning of our body similarly depends on the cooperation of all its parts, on every part doing what is best for the whole body. Our skin cells, for example, are in constant turnover, with new cells replacing the old ones that have sacrificed themselves to protect our body. Cancer cells, on the other hand, destroy the body precisely because they violate this principle and follow their own selfish, independent agenda. Indeed, the very reason ant and bee societies work so well is because all their parts, the worker ants and bees, behave selflessly. In their behaviour, they put the welfare of the larger whole above that of their own. Put simply, selfishness is divisive or disintegrative, while selflessness is integrative. It is the glue that holds wholes together. It is, in fact, the theme of the integrated process, and thus of existence. It is also what we mean by the word love, with the old Christian word for love being caritas, meaning charity, or giving, or selflessness. So love is cooperative selflessness, and not just selflessness, but unconditional selflessness, the capacity, if called upon, to make a full, self-sacrificing commitment to the maintenance of the larger whole. But, and herein lies the nub of the problem, if the meaning of existence is to behave integratively, which means behave cooperatively and selflessly, why do humans behave in the completely opposite way, in such a competitive and selfish, divisive way? Yes, the integrative theme of existence squarely confronts us humans with the issue of the human condition, the issue of our non-ideal behaviour. And so, despite being such an obvious truth, integrative meaning has been so horrifically condemning of the competitive, aggressive and selfish human race that until we could explain the good reason why humans have been divisively rather than integratively behaved, which was done in Chapter 3, and thus make it psychologically safe to admit the truth of the order developing integrative meaning of existence, we had no choice but to live in the near total denial of it. Hawking's, Einstein's and Koestler's acknowledgements of the order-developing integrative process when, as Koestler said, mechanistic science has maintained such a dedicated, hypnotic denial of it, were bold indeed. In summary then, selflessness, specifically unconditional selflessness or altruism, is the theme or meaning of existence. And since love means unconditional selflessness, love is the theme of existence. It is the meaning of life. The very great truthful denial-free thinker or prophet, Christ, emphasized the unconditionally selfless significance of the word love in the Bible when he said, "Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends." And of the biblical references to love cited above, Colossians 3:14 perfectly summarizes the integrative significance of love. "And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." But unfortunately, while the unconditionally selfless nature of love is acknowledged in the Bible, as virtually all the great truths are, in our everyday world we couldn't admit that love is unconditional selflessness, and therefore the theme of existence, until we could explain why humans don't behave lovingly and are so seemingly at odds with the integrative process. In fact, in the human condition avoiding mechanistic scientific paradigm, it is considered improper, unscientific, to even use the word love. The linguist Robin Elot summed up mechanistic science's attitude to love succinctly when he wrote in 1992 that love has been described as a taboo subject, not serious, not appropriate for scientific study. Indeed, love has been deemed so inappropriate for scientific study that it has been reported in Science and Theology News in 2004 that more than 100,000 scientific studies have been published on depression and schizophrenia, the negative aspects of human nature, but no more than a dozen good studies have been published on unselfish love. So mechanistic science has determinately resisted analysis of one of humanity's most used, valued and meaningful words. The psychologist Harry F. Harlow was another who highlighted this discrepancy when he observed that psychologists, at least psychologists who write textbooks, not only show no interest in the origin and development of love or affection, but they seem to be unaware of its very existence. The apparent repression of love by modern psychologists stands in sharp contrast with the attitude taken by many famous and normal people. The word love has the highest reference frequency of any word cited in Bartlett's book of familiar quotations. The concept of unselfish love has certainly been an unbearable area of scientific inquiry for us selfish, seemingly non-loving and unlovable humans. Chapter 4.3 God is our personification of integrative meaning. So love has been a taboo subject for science, and yet if love, or unconditional selflessness, forms only an aspect of integrative meaning, how much more unbearable has the overall tenet of integrative meaning itself been? The answer is the negative entropy-driven, integrative, cooperative, loving, selfless, order-developing theme or meaning or purpose of existence has been an almost completely unconfrontable truth for the psychologically upset, competitive, aggressive, and selfish human condition-afflicted human race. In fact, we have lived in such terrified fear and awe of the truth of integrative meaning, have been so confronted, condemned, and intimidated by it, so unable to deal with it on any sort of an equal footing, that we deified the concept, and not just as a God, but the one and only God, the most universal and fundamental, yet completely unconfrontable of truths. Monotheism, the belief that there is only one God, is an insight that goes back as far as 4,000 years ago to two very great denial-free thinkers or prophets, the Hebrew prophet Abraham, who lived around 2000 BC, and the pharaoh Akhenaten, who reigned in Egypt from approximately 1350 to 1335 BC. The very great Persian prophet Zoroaster also recognized that there is only one supreme deity, as this reference to the faith describes. Sometime around or before 600 BC, perhaps as early as 1200 BC, there came forth from the windy steppes of northeastern Iran a prophet who utterly transformed the Persian faith. The prophet was Zarathustra, or Zoroaster as the Greeks would style his name. Ahura Mazda, the supreme being or wise lord, had appeared to Zoroaster in a vision, in which the god had revealed himself to be the one supreme deity, all-seeing and all-powerful. He represented both light and truth, and was creator of all things, fountainhead of all virtue. Ranged against him stood the powers of darkness, the angels of evil and keepers of the lie. The universe was seen as a battleground in which these opposing forces contended, both in the sphere of political conquest and in the depth of each man's soul. But in time the light would shine out, scattering the darkness, and truth would prevail. A day of reckoning would arrive. And in approximately 360 BC, that other very great denial-free thinking prophet, Plato, similarly recognized that God is integrative meaning, writing that God desired that all things should be good and nothing bad, so far as this was attainable. Wherefore, also finding the whole visible sphere not at rest, but moving in an irregular and disorderly fashion, out of disorder he brought order, considering that this was in every way better than the other. But until we could explain the human condition, and explain in first principle-based scientific terms who, or more precisely, what God is, namely our personification of the negative entropy-driven integrative theme, purpose and meaning of life, and why we needed to resort to deification in the first place, we had no choice but to leave the religious concept of God in the safely abstract, undefined state. And so, despite integrative meaning being an extremely obvious truth, with evidence of the hierarchy of the order of matter everywhere we look, without understanding of our divisive condition, it was imperative for humanity that human condition avoiding mechanistic science found a way to deny such a seemingly totally condemning truth. This was easily achieved through the simple assertion that there is no meaning or purpose or theme to existence, and that while change does occur, it is a random, purposeless, directionless, meaningless, blind process. And, as stated, to cope with the imbued recognition of integrative ideality and meaning in the religious notion of God, mechanistic science simply left the concept undefined and undefinable, maintaining it was a strictly abstract, metaphysical and spiritual notion unrelated to the scientific domain. If God existed in any form, it was as an inexplicable deity, a supernatural being seated on a throne somewhere in a remote blue heaven, who could be worshipped from afar as someone superior to us, mere mortals, thus nullifying any direct and confronting comparisons with our own upset state. Religion and science were firmly demarcated as two entirely unrelated subjects. Indeed, E.O. Wilson succinctly captured the mechanistic science's view on the matter when he said, "I take a very strong stance against the mingling of religion and science." But of course, the truth is, to use Nobel Prize-winning physicist Charles H. Townes' words, they, science and religion, both represent man's efforts to understand his universe and must ultimately be dealing with the same substance. As we understand more in each realm, The two must grow together. Converge they must. The physicist Max Planck, another Nobel winner, similarly recognised in his 1932 book, Where is Science Going?, that there can never be any real opposition between science and religion, for the one is the complement of the other. As my headmaster at Geelong Grammar School, Australia's greatest ever educator, Sir James Darling, said, "The scientist can no more deny or devaluate the truths of spiritual experience than the theologian can neglect the truths of science. And the two truths must be reconcilable, and it must be of importance to each of us that they should be reconciled." And with understanding of the human condition now found, converge they have. Ideality, which religions and the truthful, denial, free-thinking, God-confronting, not avoiding prophets they were founded around represented, and our search for understanding of our non-ideal reality, which science represented, the word science literally means knowledge, have finally been reconciled. Yes, with the human condition now explained and our divisive, seemingly non-integrative state finally understood, all humans can at last safely admit and recognise that there has only been one God, one all-dominating and all-pervading theme or meaning of existence, which is integrative meaning, a truth we recognise when we say God is love. It should be mentioned here that despite the fact that the admittance of the integrative meaning first required solving the issue of our divisive human condition, a rare few holistic scientists have not only courageously defied the almost universal need to deny the development of order of matter on Earth, or integrative meaning, they have actually acknowledged that it is what we mean by God. If we include more of what the aforementioned giants of physics, Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein, said earlier about order being the main characteristic of change in the universe, we can see that they both regarded God to be the personification of integrative meaning. In 1989, Hawking said, "I would use the term God as the embodiment of the laws of physics." In 2002, he went further, saying, "The overwhelming impression is of order in the universe. The more we discover about the universe, the more we find that it is governed by rational laws. If one liked, one could say that this order was the work of God." Einstein thought so. We could call order by the name of God. Einstein's views on the matter were chronicled in the 1997 PBS documentary Einstein Revealed, which reported Einstein as saying that, "Over time I have come to realise that behind everything is an order that we glimpse only indirectly, because it's unbearably condemning. This is religiousness. In this sense, I am a religious man." Einstein was also recognising that God is order or harmony when he said, "In view of such harmony in the cosmos, which I, with my limited human mind, am able to recognise, there are yet people who say there is no God." Einstein's friend and occasional collaborator, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Erwin Schrödinger, was another leading scientist who acknowledged that integrative unity is what we've been terming God when he wrote in his 1954 book, Nature and the Greeks and Science and Humanism, that "Science is reticent too when it is a question of the great unity, of which we all somehow form part, to which we belong. The most popular name for it in our time is God, with a capital G." Schrödinger's contemporary and fellow Nobel Prize-winning physicist Werner Heisenberg also recognised the relationship between the integrative meaning of existence that science is able to point to, and the concept of God that religion recognises, when he wrote in 1974, "I have repeatedly been compelled to ponder on the relationship of these two regions of thought, science and religion, for I have never been able to doubt the reality of that to which they point." Yes, the reality of order or harmony or unity is apparent everywhere, and it is what our religiousness, our belief in God, is concerned with acknowledging. I might mention that while Mahatma Gandhi was an inspired leader of the Indian nation, rather than a scientist, he was another who bravely acknowledged that there is an orderliness in the universe. There is an unalterable law governing everything and every being that exists or lives. That law, then, which governs all life, is God. As did Plato, who referred to God, the orderer of all. In his 1987 book, The Cosmic Blueprint, another holistic physicist, the Templeton Prize winner Paul Davies, actually went so far as to protest against the denial of integrative meaning in the world of science, writing that we seem to be on the verge of discovering not only wholly new laws of nature, but ways of thinking about nature that depart radically from traditional science. Way back in the primeval phase of the universe, gravity triggered a cascade of self-organizing processes. Organization begets organization that led, step by step, to the conscious individuals who now contemplate the history of the cosmos and wonder what it all means. There exists alongside the entropy arrow another arrow of time, the negative entropy arrow, equally fundamental and no less subtle in nature. I refer to the fact that the universe is progressing through the steady growth of structure, organisation and complexity to ever more developed and elaborate states of matter and energy. This unidirectional advance we might call the optimistic arrow, as opposed to the pessimistic arrow of the second law. There has been a tendency for scientists to simply deny the existence of the optimistic arrow. One wonders why. We can now appreciate the reason why science is reticent when it comes to a question of the great unity, the reason why scientists deny the optimistic arrow of integrative meaning is because it was far too psychologically dangerous to acknowledge without first finding the biological reason and thus defence for our divisive, apparently non-integrative, ungodly human condition. No wonder we have been, as we say, a God-fearing, in fact, so in awe of God to the point of being a God-worshipping, not a God-confronting species. As Burdave put it in his 1931 book, The Destiny of Man, he cannot, man struggles to, break through to the paradise that lies beyond the painful distinction between good and evil, and the suffering connected therewith. Man's fear of God is his fear of himself, of the yawning abyss of non-being, alienation, in his own nature. Our species' immense fear, and thus denial, of the truth of integrative meaning is, of course, the subject of Plato's famous allegory of the human condition referred to in paragraph 83, which describes humans as being imprisoned in a cave. As prisoners in this metaphorical cave, we are only able to envisage the outside world via shadows cast on the back wall of the cave. These shadows, which symbolize our limited and distorted human condition avoiding dishonest, immensely alienated, phony and fake view of the world, are thrown by the light of a fire that, situated in the entrance to the cave, effectively prevents any escape from it. Explaining the symbolism of the fire, Plato wrote that the light of the fire in the cave prison corresponds to the power of the sun, from which we have to turn back, because if we, the cave prisoner, were to go out into the sunlight, the process would be a painful one, to which we, would much object. Plato explained that the sun represents the universal self-sufficient first principle, the absolute form of good, and the highest form of knowledge, which we can now understand is integrative meaning. Fire is a common theme in many mythologies, appearing as a metaphor for the integrative, godly ideals of life, whose condemning, scorching glare we had to turn back from. In the Zoroastrian religion, fire is a representative of God, his physical manifestation. Fire is bright, always points upward, is always pure. In Christian mythology, the story of Genesis features a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. The Bible also records the Israelites as saying, "Let us not hear the voice of the Lord, our God, nor see this great fire any more, or we will die." The biblical character Job was another who pleaded for relief from confrontation with the unbearably depressing, integrative, godly ideals when he lamented, "Why then did you, God, bring me out of the womb? Turn away from me so I can have a moment's joy before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and deep shadow, to the land of deepest night," depression. Christ also recognized the problem of the exposing light of truth that he was an unresigned, denial-free spokesman for, when he said, "The light shines in the darkness, but everyone who does evil, becomes upset, suffers of the human condition, hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed." Like Plato's use of the light of the sun metaphor, the rock band U2's 1992 song, "Staring at the Sun," contains these lyrics that reveal just how unbearably confronting the cooperative, loving, integrative ideals of life have been of our corrupted human condition. "It's been a long hot summer, let's get under cover, don't try too hard to think, don't think at all. I'm not the only one staring at the sun, afraid of what you'd find if you take a look inside. Not just deaf and dumb, I'm staring at the sun, not the only one who's happy to go blind." So again, while integrative meaning is the most obvious, profound, and thus important of all truths, it is clearly also the truth that has appeared to most condemn humans. And in the absence of the explanation as to why we as a species appear to be so at odds with the integrative meaning of life, we humans have sensibly taken one of two options. We either practice denial of integrative meaning, and even of God, and thus of the issue of our self-corruption, or we indirectly acknowledged our self-corruption by acknowledging the existence of God and embracing some expression of faith that a greater dignifying understanding of our divisive condition does exist and would one day be found. To cope with our less than ideal human condition, there has only ever been either denial or faith. To counter the utter dishonesty of mechanistic science's denial of the existence of integrating meaning or God, support for an extremely literal interpretation of God in the form of so-called creationism and intelligent design emerged. While still having to avoid the human condition and therefore the truth of integrative meaning, these movements did acknowledge God, but only in a fundamentalist way in which God took the form of an actual being who designed life on earth or created the world in just 6 days. In truth, both the mechanistic approach and these more literal attitudes were immensely dishonest in that mechanistic scientists wanted to pretend to be rational and either deny any semblance of integrative meaning by refuting the existence of the concept of God, or acknowledge the concept of God but claim it has nothing to do with science, while supporters of creationism and intelligent design chose to admit to a semblance of integrative meaning in the form of a God who is literally a special being or deity, with the downside being that such a stance necessarily meant abandoning all attempts at rationality. We can see that the real issue neither party was willing or able to acknowledge is the issue of integrative meaning and its human condition confronting implications. I should mention that the advocates of intelligent design would have us believe that their position is different to that of creationists. The main website for intelligent design states that the theory of intelligent design is concerned with whether the apparent design in nature is genuine design, the product of an intelligent cause, or is simply the product of an undirected process such as natural selection acting on random variations, and that, unlike creationism, the scientific theory of intelligent design does not claim that modern biology can identify whether the intelligent cause detected through science is supernatural. In other words, intelligent design acknowledges integrative meaning, the development of order of matter, but doesn't discount that a supernatural type creator or being or God might be involved. So intelligent design is trying to have it both ways, appear to be scientific, but still allow for a supernatural creator. It is still fundamentally similar to creationism, which unscientifically supports the idea of a supernatural creator. Indeed, the truth of integrative meaning and its human condition confronting implications have been so unbearably confronting that in recent years mechanistic science has, in an insidious attempt to keep the issue even further at bay, evasively steered the discussion towards whether the concept of God has been irrevocably undermined by physicists' ongoing discoveries about the Big Bang origin of the universe, the extinction of time before the Big Bang, and, more recently, the possibility of multiple universes. This is classic displacement behaviour, which, as defined in Wikipedia, is an unconscious defence mechanism whereby the mind redirects effects from an object felt to be dangerous or unacceptable to an object felt to be safe or acceptable. The fact is that starting with the boundaries of our reality of matter, space and time, and drawing on the laws of physics within which we live, we can construct the human condition and also solve it, and, by so doing, make it possible to demystify God and, indeed, bring an end to the whole debate about his existence. The enormous issue of God that has existed in the lives of humans relates entirely to the integrative process of the development of order of matter that occurs in the world within which we live, that is bounded by the elements of matter, space and time, and the effect the laws of physics have on those elements as we experience them. The insecure state of the human condition that caused us to so fear and revere all manner of gods, and then just one God, is created and solved within that realm. Science's task has been to be a winnower of mystery and superstition, with the ultimate mystery it needed to solve being the human condition. So our ability now to understand the human condition necessarily ends the fear, confusion, bewilderment and mystery that fueled such superstitious thought. It ends ignorance. Paul Davies was emphasising the integrative meaning related real issue about God when he said in 1995, "So where is God in this story of physics? Not especially in the Big Bang. To me, the true miracle of nature is to be found in the ingenious and unswerving lawfulness of the cosmos, a lawfulness that permits complex order to emerge from the chaos." Yes, with understanding of the human condition now found, it is at last psychologically safe to demystify God as integrative meaning, and, by so doing, finally reconcile religion and science. From the religious perspective, this is the time the prophet Isaiah was looking forward to, when reconciling understanding of the human condition would be found, and we could revere, instead of fear, the truth of integrative meaning or God. "Why, O Lord, do you make us wander from your ways and harden our hearts, so we do not revere you? Do not be angry beyond measure. Do not remember our sins forever. All that we treasured, before the human condition emerged, lies in ruins. After all this, O Lord, will you hold yourself back? Will you keep silent and punish us beyond measure?" And from the scientific side of the fence, when the scientist-philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote in 1938 that "I can see a direction and a line of progress for life, a line and a direction which are in fact so well marked that I am convinced their reality will be universally admitted by the science of tomorrow." He too was recognising how obvious the truth of integrative meaning is, and how it wouldn't be able to be universally admitted until the human condition reconciled science of tomorrow emerged. I should mention here that there have been a few scientists, in addition to Hawking, Einstein, Koestler, de Chardin and Davies, who jumped the gun and admitted integrative meaning as the titles of the following books, including 3 by Davies, illustrate. For instance, David Bohm wrote Wholeness and the Implicate Order in 1980. Ilya Prigogine and Isabel Stengers wrote Order Out of Chaos in 1984. Paul Davies wrote God and the New Physics in 1983, The Cosmic Blueprint in 1987, and The Mind of God, Science and the Search for Ultimate Meaning in 1992. Charles Birch wrote Nature and God in 1965, On Purpose in 1990, and Biology and the Riddle of Life in 1999. M. Mitchell Waldrop wrote Complexity, the Emerging Science at the Edge of Order and Chaos in 1992. Roger Lewin wrote Complexity, Life at the Edge of Chaos, the Major New Theory that Unifies All Sciences in 1993. Stuart Kauffman wrote The Origins of Order, Self-Organization and Selection in Evolution in 1993. At Home in the Universe, The Search for the Laws of Self-Organization and Complexity in 1995, and Anti-Chaos in 1996. And Richard J. Byrd wrote Chaos and Life, Complexity and Order in the Evolution and Thought in 2003. But such admissions are, nevertheless, an anomaly because, as has been emphasised, the vast majority of scientists haven't been prepared to go anywhere near the historically unbearably confronting truth of integrative meaning. And, as stated in Chapter 2.12, in coming off such a dishonest base, it is impossible to find a true understanding of our world and place in it, which Desjardins also understood when, in 1956, he wrote that biology cannot develop and fit coherently into the universe of science unless we decide to recognise in life the expression of one of the most significant and fundamental movements in the world around us, the vast universal phenomenon of complexification of matter. This is something that must be clearly appreciated if we are to get away to a good start in our study of man. This complexification of matter is a very simple concept, but the more we think about it, the more, in fact, are we led to see the world of life as a vast sheaf of particles rushing headlong down the slope of indefinite corpusculization. First, they are the regressive currents, entropy, dissipation of energy, but they are progressive or constructive currents too, a growing complexity, the passage from an unordered to an ordered heterogeneity, where at a certain point in this progression, vitalization occurs, and one portion of the cosmic stuff not only does not disintegrate, but even begins, by producing a sort of bloom upon itself, to vitalize. As will shortly be explained in paragraph 348, this is when the replicating DNA molecule appeared and made a business of actively resisting disintegration. Life can no longer be regarded as a superficial accident in the universe. We must look on it as ready to seep through the narrowest fissure at any point whatsoever in the cosmos, and once it has appeared, obliged to use every opportunity and every means to reach the furthest extremity of everything it can attain, the ultimate, externally, of complexity, internally, of consciousness. Plato is another who recognized this inherent limitation of the integrative meaning-denying mechanistic approach when, long ago, he wrote that the good, as explained in paragraph 331, the good is integrative meaning, gives the objects of knowledge their truth and the mind the power of knowing, just as the sun makes the things we see visible. The good, therefore, may be said to be the source not only of the intelligibility of the objects of knowledge, but also of their existence and reality. Yes, this loss of the power of knowing has been very serious indeed. Koestler, also who felt it, bemoaning the crippled, stalled, atrophied state of all of science, but of biology and psychology in particular, when he said in his 1978 book, A Summing Up, that blind reductionist mechanistic sciences denial of integrative meaning has taken the life out of biology as well as psychology, writing that although the facts of the integration of matter were there for everyone to see, orthodox evolutionists were reluctant to accept their theoretical implications. The idea that living organisms, in contrast to machines, were primarily active and not merely reactive, that instead of passively adapting to their environment, they were creating new patterns of structure. Such ideas were profoundly distasteful to social Darwinians, behaviourists and reductionists in general. Evolution is being compared to a journey from an unknown origin towards an unknown destination, a sailing along a vast ocean. But we can at least chart the route, and there is no denying that there is a wind which makes the sails move. The purposiveness of all vital processes, causality and finality, are complementary principles in the sciences of life. If you take out finality and purpose, you have taken the life out of biology as well as psychology. As was pointed out in paragraph 188, towards the end of The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin anticipated that in the distant future I see open fields for far more important researches. Psychology will be based on a new foundation, that of the necessary acquirement of each mental power and capacity by gradation, light will be thrown in the origin of man and his history. Given Koestler's comment that if you take out finality and the integrative tendency, or purpose, you have taken the life out of biology as well as psychology, what was required to bring about Darwin's new enlightening foundation for far more important research in biology as well as psychology was not only acknowledgement of the involvement of our conscious mental power, but also of integrative purpose. So what is the far more important research that results from thinking from the new enlightening foundation of accepting the truth of integrative purpose?